Now let's explore the arrow functions introduced in ECMAScript 6. Arrow functions are just another syntax to create functions. But before that, let's see how do we create the normal traditional functions in JavaScript. So for that, we write function and then its name, for example, square. And then in curved brackets, we pass the input parameters. And then inside curly braces, we write the body of the function or the output of the function. So here I've made a square function which will take an input n, and it will print whenever we call this function, it will print console.log n times n. So now let's call it by writing square and let's pass 5. So we can see that in the output we have 25. Now this very function can also be created using an arrow function. So for arrow function, we basically provide two types of values. The first one is the input of the function, and the second is what is the output of the function. So for input, we write n, and then let's make an arrow. We write the output of the function. So here I write console.log n times n. So now if you want to save this function, we can save it in a variable square. So var square. Now this function would be called in the same way the original function was called. Now let's create another arrow function and let's name it multiply. Now since for multiplication we need two inputs, we write them inside curved brackets and then we write x comma y in brackets and this becomes our input. Now after arrow we write the output of the input or what we want to do with the input. So we write console.log x times y. So now let's call this function by writing multiply and let's pass 4 comma 5. So x becomes 4 and y becomes 5. So we get 20 in our output. Now in JavaScript we have already seen how do we use the map function. Now let's see how do we use the arrow functions alongside the map. So now let's create a list nums in which the values are 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now in the nums list, we want to double every item that's present in it. So let's create a variable var doubles and let's keep its value as nums.map. Now instead of the traditional function that we pass in map, we will pass an arrow function. Now this function would take the input one by one from nums, that is the values of nums one by one. So for input, we write any variable n and then arrow and the output is 2 times n. So now when we print doubles, we can see that in the output we have 2, 4, 6, 8. Now instead of 2 times n, if I write n times n in output, we can see that squares of all the items of nums list are printed 1, 4, 9 and 16. Similarly, we can filter this list using an arrow function. So if we write var events equals nums.filter. Now in this we pass in the values of nums one by one, and for that input we write n and arrow equals n mod 2 equal to 0. So for this we return true or false for every value of n depending on whether we want to keep it in the result or not. So if it's returning true, the output would be kept in the list, and if we return false, the output would be removed. So let's say we want to keep only the even numbers, we can output true for n mod 2 equals 0 because this value is true only for even values of n and this value is false for odd values of n, and hence the odd values would be filtered out of the list.